Good afternoon. Good morning if you're joining us from the West Coast or from Alaska or Hawaii or anywhere else. Thank you for joining us on this February monthly policy update. First and foremost, happy Leap Day to everyone. Happy birthday to Ja Rule. Happy birthday to Tony Robbins. I was listening on the radio this morning. Some very famous Leap babies. Happy birthday, Tyrese Halliburton. Any Indiana Pacers fans out there? You only get this day once every 4 years. We're so grateful you're choosing to spend a portion of it with us. I know we all need an extra day this month. So we're gonna make good use of it here on this February monthly policy update. So again, I want to welcome you. Let's get started. And as people join and have questions, we will, as usual, encourage people to put those in the chat or the Q&A function. I'm Ben Kirsch. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations here at IS. If you're joining us for the first time on an independent sector webinar, I want to welcome you. Independent Sector is a national organization of charities, foundations, and corporate giving programs working together to ensure that all people living in the United States can thrive. This is a webinar, so you're muted. Again, you're welcome to drop questions into the Q&A function at any time. If you have issues, please email publicpolicy@independentsector.org. Before we start, I want to respectfully acknowledge I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. It is the ancestral home of the Piscataway people. They're still in the area working to reclaim their land and their traditional practice. Also, a lot of the buildings we inhabit in Washington were built by enslaved people. Wherever you are joining us from today, again, I want to welcome you and wish you a happy Leap Day. Congress is certainly putting their extra day to good use. And we're really grateful to have our partners, Wes Coulomb and Jessica Cameron, with Washington Counsel Ernst & Young here with us today to give us the latest updates from the Hill. So as I turn to them, I want to especially thank Jessica for being with us today with her deep background in the House of Representatives. Jessica, the House is making moves today, even at the moment. What can you tell us about the latest on Capitol Hill today?
They certainly are. We like to say in the House, or I like to say as a former House staffer, the House has more fun, but that can cut both ways, if you will. And certainly this is going to be a big week for Congress. In terms of appropriations, so we're kind of where rubber meets the road this week and next week. There are two funding deadlines to keep in mind here. One is March 1st, which if anyone's looking at the calendar is this Friday, tomorrow, and then also March 8th, which is next Friday. Essentially, you have half of the appropriations bills will expire by tomorrow, and the other half will expire next week. The ones expiring include things that are relatively less controversial, I guess is a good way to put it, but so funding packages like MILCON or Military Construction VA, Agriculture, Transportation HUD, and Energy and Water. And the other half expire next week. As you know, Congress's main function is the power of the purse, and they need to pass appropriations bills every fiscal year. Also, you probably are aware that things aren't going very well right now. We have a pretty narrow margin in both the House and the Senate with divided government, and folks are having quite the time trying to agree on a path forward. So as far as what's going on right now, it looks like we could have a temporary funding patch for this week. Essentially, the first half of bills that are coming due tomorrow would be extended for a week to line up with next week's March 8th deadline. The House is currently voting on that at the moment. Certainly, that doesn't take away all of the problems because we'll still come back on March 8th with this issue. We've heard from Speaker Johnson and from others and the idea of potentially floating a longer term CR or continuing resolution until maybe possibly the end of March or near the end of March on March 22nd to give folks additional time to sort out appropriations bills. So, a lot here, even with some action that could get resolved this week. Next week will also be an interesting week. Similar to that, maybe I'll, I want to talk about the tax package because that has some potentially interesting things for IS members. But before I get to that, also should be aware that in addition to all of the appropriations work that's going on, we know that March 11th is the date that President Biden will introduce the president's budget. The president does this every year. I like to always remind clients and folks that this is not an actual budget, but think of it more like your children's Christmas wish list for the year. So it really does make a mark in terms of showing where the president and the administration are and what their policy priorities are for the year. And also, along with that, that'll get released a few days after the State of the Union, which is scheduled for March 7th. So along with all these things, we'll also have department heads come to the Hill from the administration to talk about different parts of the budget. Specifically, you'll see Ways and Means, Health, and some of the other committees that you all may be focused on talk about the president's budget and specific issues there. Now turning to the tax package. So, earlier this year in January, we had the Ways and Means Chairman Smith, as well as the Senate Finance Chairman, Senator Wyden, get together and come to a deal on a tax package that would extend some of the TCJA provisions on the corporate side, as well as make some changes and extend some items for the child tax credit and a few other items as well. That package is very much contingent or is likely to be contingent on what happens with appropriations. So tax packages are quite interesting in that they typically need 2/3 majority in the Senate to become law. And as a result, they end up getting kind of stuck into appropriations bills as a way to kind of move them forward without having that requirement and to get them done. As I mentioned before, appropriations is very much up in the air, a lot of question marks as far as where it moves forward. And if we continue to have CRs, then it's very unlikely that a tax package will end up getting stuck to a CR and move forward. There really needs to be an appropriations deal of real appropriations bills to fund the government for the rest of the fiscal year in order for that to be stuck on. So that's thing one that, in terms of a carriage that the horse or, a horse that the carriage can pull, that's up in the air. Additionally, there are some questions as far as whether the substance of the bill that, both sides and both chambers can agree on. And so we're seeing that Senate Republicans, remember I said it was Senate Democrats and House Republicans that came to a deal on this. And some Senate Republicans are feeling a little left out, I think is the way, a little FOMO, maybe is the way I would describe it. Maybe not necessarily to them, but I think that's a good way to think about it. And so their Senator Crapo, who is the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, has now publicly stated that he'd like some changes to address some of the concerns that his members have. Why am I bringing this up, or how is this important to all of you? A few reasons. One is obviously it extends and expands the child tax credit, not all the way from the CARES Act and some of the changes that we saw during the pandemic, but tries to extend some of that temporarily to provide some relief to low-income families with children. That's a huge Democratic priority. I should also say that's very expensive, so that was a huge deal to get at least to come to an agreement on that. So that's thing one. Additionally, it has some provisions extending LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit, which I know some of IS members, some of you all may be interested in. It's also, I think, worth noting what's not in the bill, and that's it does not provide an extension of the charitable giving or universal charitable giving deduction that I know IS and others have fought really hard for. But I do know that there's a lot of members on the Hill that are looking at that and are hoping to get that in if the bill expands in some way. Finally, it does have a limitation on the ERTC, which is a pandemic era tax credit for businesses and for nonprofits. And so that would essentially stop the date at which you could apply for those funds. The CARES Act and other packages during the pandemic essentially gave a pretty long runway as far as when you could apply for those for the credit and for those funds. So that's kind of those broad contours. Again, I think up in there in terms of both substance of what that looks like and also in terms of what it could potentially get stuck on. And at this point, I think that's it for the moment. Maybe one other thing I'll say is that, certainly as we gear up for 2025, we talk about this tax package, but 2025 will certainly be a monumental year for nonprofits as well. And so, look out for some work that will be done on both the Senate Finance Committee, more so though on the Ways and Means Committee, of trying to do some education, doing some initial prep work on what 2025 might look like. Remember that the TCJA had lowered the individual rates for many taxpayers, as well as changed the levels for the senior deduction for different changes to SALT and other things. And so there's a question as far as how far they go in terms of extending those provisions or whether they don't. A lot of that will be determined, will be contingent on the 2024 election and who ultimately has the pen to write those pieces of legislation. But you're going to start to see a lot of folks start the work now to kind of really understand what can be done, what needs to be done, and what will potentially be discussed during 2025. So I'll stop there and see if Wes or others will either, if there are questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or if Wes or others have anything to add.
No, that's good. Excellent summary update, Jessica. The only thing I would add is that the House did just pass the CR to extend the appropriations bills from March 8th for the first 4, and then to March 22nd for the remaining 8 appropriations bills. So we have that passed now through the House. And it will likely go to the Senate. My guess is probably tomorrow sometime. Could be as late tonight, but probably sometime tomorrow midday. It will get some consideration in the Senate. Hopefully get the president's desk by the end of the day tomorrow, which is actually the deadline for expiration of the CR. So that's just one quick update.
Thank you both. And so I will note on the so I guess first a question about appropriations, and then let's come back to tax and other questions from the audience. So Speaker Johnson had kind of telegraphed that he wasn't going forward on continuing resolutions without a sense that they were going to be able to move forward on at least 4 or maybe even more appropriations bills. So is it our sense that they do have a deal, in principle? Do they have actual legislative text of those bills yet? When might we see the bills that are presumably subject to that agreement?
Yeah, so the appropriators indicated they have reached agreement in principle. I've not seen language for all these for 6 of the 12 appropriations bills. The original 4 plus 2 more. I think Interior was one. I can't remember the other one that was added to the list of the original 4. So I think they said they have an agreement in principle on these 6 appropriations bills. They think they can then move by the end of next week, which would be the new deadline for action on those first 4, not the 6, but just the first 4. So I think they think they have, the ability to move on those 6, if not at least on 4 of those by the 8th. If they need more time for the other 2 to the 22nd, they have the time. So that's kind of like where things stand. Obviously, the issue has been, as you mentioned, they already kind of agreed to the top line numbers and the individual numbers for the appropriations bill. So the dollar amounts are not the problem. What the problem is policy writers that most Republicans, some Democrats, most Republicans have been trying to insist upon adding to the appropriations bills on controversial, policy, social issues, etc. And those have been the issue and the holdup really on getting a real final agreement nailed down. So I think they can work through those, and they're trying to work through those. I think there's a good chance they can pass some of the appropriations bills by the end of next week. And so we'll see how that progresses from that standpoint. But then the other ones, Homeland Security, defense, are much more challenging, and they have longer time horizon of March 22nd. So we'll see if they can get those done by then. But they're much more challenging, much more difficult policy writers on those, as well as the individual funding priorities and some of the things. Labor HHS is always an issue with healthcare, health issues. Abortion is always a big policy writer attached to that bill. So those are going to be more challenging to get nailed down and finished by the 22nd, I think.
Thank you both very much. And then again, I will invite questions from our audience. Before we pivot off appropriation, I know I said we were going to go to tax, but have we received any indications of how this deal and this timeline regarding the president's budget proposal and how it might impact it? Jessica, I know you mentioned, I think, the Christmas wish list. I imagine, Joe Biden's wish list is a little different than my girl's was. But the timing of that wish list, are we still looking at the same date?
My understanding is that I haven't heard otherwise, that the date would change, that March 11th, last I heard, is the date that the president's budget will come out. If you remember, a few years ago, the first year of the Biden administration, it came out around Memorial Day weekend, which was not fun if you were on vacation like I was and having to read through the budget. So I think that's one of the dates at the moment, but certainly, it's not out of the realm of possibility that it could change if we are kind of wrapped up in this, budget, this appropriations negotiations, still by the 11th. So we'll kind of see what happens. I think next week is going to be a pretty important week, as well as this week, to see kind of how things shape up.
Yeah, one thing to add on that, Ben, is traditionally you get the full budget proposals, you get the analytical perspective, which has all the data and the assumptions and the economic analysis goes with it, based on the baseline. That's usually kind of a 2-book package. There's a lot of detailed information that comes out in a traditional release. If they haven't finished all the appropriations bills, and maybe they only have 4 of them or 6 of them done by next week, and so it's gonna be a challenge, I think, for the administration to put out the full budget with all the economic assumption, the details to it. So we could see on the 11th only kind of more of a, here's our budget proposals, rather than the full scale budget detail with all the assumptions and the economic analysis that goes with it, until they've kind of revised the baseline based on what they've passed in the appropriations process. So that to me is a more likely scenario, rather than the fulsome entire budget coming out on the 11th, something much smaller. It really kind of encapsulates their budget proposals without all the economic analysis that goes with it, et cetera. So we'll have to watch and see how that plays out. That's kind of where I think kind of it goes.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Just on the tax front, Jessica alluded to Senate Republicans feeling a little bit left out and having some things that they might like to see in that bill. The headlines have been more focused around potential changes to the child tax credit, eligibility provisions of it. I think it's worth noting and reminding everyone that there are senators who've been working real hard to advocate for adding a restoration of the charitable deduction for everyone to that list. For people who were participating in Foundations on the Hill this week, or in Museums Advocacy Day, which we know is also this week. Thank you for joining our sector. Thank you for being part of your democracy. You would have heard people like Senator Lankford tell a crowd of advocates that they were going to fight real hard to try to get a restoration of the charitable deduction into this tax package. and that they were going to keep fighting for that provision. I know that advocates also added a couple co-sponsors to that broader legislation in the Senate this week. I was in a House office yesterday that committed there and then to co-sponsor the Charitable Act. So it was fun to watch progress being made in real time on that. And I think we're all under no delusion that work was accomplished for good yesterday. I did want to share that. While we're speaking of foundations on the Hill, I would also note a couple other issues that advocates raised with offices around post-graduation scholarships, helping foundations make grants to draw much needed talent to their communities to help bolster their workforce, and around the Nonprofit Seed Act in the House of Representatives, legislation that endorsed by about 700 nonprofits spanning the whole country, that would give nonprofits a seat at the table, as well as make some other really important policy changes to strengthen the partnership between nonprofits and the federal government. So I would note those. IS was a partner on Foundations on the Hill under the leadership of United Philanthropy Forum. So I'll pause there for questions or additional comments from Washington Council before I have a couple other updates.
Just to build on the tax bill conversation, Vince, it's a live issue right now after they get through the appropriations process, right? So Senator Crapo, as Jessica pointed out, has kind of raised concerns about the package negotiated between Chairman Smith and Chairman Wyden, particularly focused around the child tax credit piece, their fundability, ability to use two things. One is ability to use prior year's taxable income as the basis of your current year's credit that's available in 2024 and 2025. For 2023, there's also a provision there that allows the Treasury Department, or IRS rather, to recalculate your tax credit if you've already filed your tax return for 2023. Obviously, we're in the middle of the tax season, right? And taxes are due to be filed by April 15th. So if you already filed your tax return and your child tax credit, was X, and then they pass this bill, it becomes law, it's obviously going to be higher. And then the IRS has the ability to send out checks to people to make up the difference for that. So there's concern amongst Republicans for that. Crapo also wants to add other things to the bill, as you mentioned, right? Some other extenders that were left out of the package, technical corrections to the Secure 2.0 pension bill that also was acted last Congress, and some things like that he wants to have his members have a say on the bills that goes to the Senate if it does. So that's kind of out there trying to negotiate how they would one, process that. Would it go to the Senate Finance Committee? Would it be some sort of negotiated amendment process on the Senate floor? And would Schumer and Wyden agree to that, given Crapo's insistence upon having the bill change? So that's kind of where we are, kind of stuck in that negotiation posture. Certainly not going to happen anytime soon, but they're trying to get done by the end of April, given the tax filing season is kind of underway at the moment.
All right, I'm going to turn to a couple other updates. One is that in this space, you all have heard us mention in the past proposed regulations regarding donor advised funds and excises on taxable distributions made by sponsoring organizations. As many will know, that comment period has closed, and what we've seen was quite a response from the charitable sector, and the IRS and Treasury have noticed a hearing on this rulemaking coming up. The hearing's scheduled for May 6th at 10 a.m. The IRS must receive the speaker's outlines and interest by April 5th, 2024. If they don't receive any outlines, they won't hold the hearing. I'm sure they've already received some. The interest can be submitted to public hearings at irs.gov is the best and preferred way to contact the IRS if you are interested in testifying. Another final update I have for you is on another topic that we've been discussing in this space in recent months, which is oversight activity particularly in the House of Representatives about civic engagement activities of nonprofits and whether those cross any lines or improprieties. So I should note that in addition to the Ways and Means Committee, on February 14th, the chairman of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, James Comer of Kentucky, sent a letter to the IRS commissioner opening an investigation into the so-called political and lobbying activities of 501c3 public charities. Chairman Comer noted an IRS Inspector General report flagging specific problems with enforcement of regulations for charities and other tax-exempt organizations, as well as a general lack of responsiveness and poor resource allocation plans. So this is just another signal that in this even-numbered year, in this presidential year, that the nonprofit sector's activities, whether you are a charity, whether you're a C4, a C6, or any other type of nonprofit, that those activities are under increased scrutiny from the House of Representatives, and that independent sector and other sector spanning organizations in particular will remain vigilant. This is an important and a delicate issue for our sector. So I'm sure there's more to come on that. With that, I want to pause one last time for questions about the appropriations process, about the pending tax bill, about DAF regulations or the Nonprofit Seed Act or oversight. Again, you've got a few hours left in this bonus day. We're grateful you spent part of it with us, and we'll let you get back to it. I'm also really grateful to Wes and to Jessica for being with us today, and to Nisha and our team for helping make everything run smoothly. Thanks all.
Thanks, man. Thanks all.